How's everybody doing tonight?
Good.
Thank you for making it out. Appreciate it. I know it's tough on a Tuesday sometimes in the middle of the week and everything, but it's good to get out and have an interesting class during the midweek, right? Very good. Well, cool. Well, I'm going to be talking a little bit about Liber Resh vel Helios. Just to give you a basic idea, how many of you are generally familiar with it? At least a little bit. Most of you guys a little bit.
I looked it up.
Right on. That's good. So you're familiar a little bit with the general idea of it. Got a couple people that are completely unfamiliar with it. That's okay. That's great. This is good. This is, something that I think a lot of the members that have been around for a long time, like maybe this is like too basic for them, right? This is some old school kind of stuff that they've been over before, and I'm really thankful and excited to see some people here that are maybe looking to kind of start exploring this or working on it, or at least coming to understand it a little bit better. So cool. Thank you for being here. The sun is very important, obviously, in a literal standpoint, as far as it being source of light, source of life. Anything that is growing and thriving and progressing on this earth is being fed by the solar energy. We see the sun as a very important symbol also within Thelemic. There is a lot of solar imagery and solar symbolism that is incorporated into the Thelemic system. And so what Liber Resh is, it basically is a solar adoration. It's a very simple, very short, reasonably easy to memorize ritual, or really not even so much a ritual, but really more of a practice or just an exercise that you can, if you want, incorporate into your daily practice by itself, or even incorporating it into another existing practice that you might have. Maybe you already meditate during the day. Maybe you have other ritual that you like to do at some point throughout the course of your day. And Liber Resh fits itself very nicely into working around within those same parameters. In the Gnostic Mass, one of the central rituals of our system, we see a lot of references to the sun, to the solar energy, to the solar deities, and to the importance that plays in our lives, in the lives of existence around us, and also in our spiritual progression. The first collects of within the Gnostic Mass, Liber 15, reads, "Lord, visible and sensible, of whom this earth is but a frozen spark, turning about thee with annual and diurnal motion, source of light, source of life, let thy perpetual radiance hearten us to continual labor and enjoyment, so that as we are constant partakers of thy bounty, we may in our particular orbit give out light and life, sustenance and joy to them that revolve about us without diminution of substance or effulgence forever." From another passage we read, "Thou that art one, our Lord in the universe the Sun, our Lord in ourselves, whose name is mystery of mystery, uttermost being, whose radiance enlightening the worlds, is also the breath that maketh every god, even and death, to tremble before thee. By the sign of light, appear thou glorious upon the throne of the sun." And keep in mind some of the verbiage here that we're going to see later as we incorporate this into the actual ritual text. And we'll go through the whole text of Liber Resh itself. Essentially, Liber Resh is the book of the sun. Helios was the Greek personification of the sun. And Heliopolis was an Egyptian city known for the worship of various different solar gods and deities. So, Vel Helios, of the sun. Resh is the Hebrew letter attributed to the tarot trump, the sun, which we see here from the Thoth deck, and has a number value within the system of 200. Thus the CC, the 200 in Roman numerals there. So that's where we get the name from, Liber Resh, and the rest of that there. Aleister Crowley created a lot of different practices for his students to work with, different tools for them to try and approach their own progressions. And you can read about a lot of these in various different pieces of his literature. However, he was particularly adamant about the beneficial nature of practicing Liber Resh regularly. Later in his life, at 8 lectures on yoga, he wrote, "Every student should make a point of saluting the sun in the manner recommended in Liber Resh 4 times daily." He also wrote, "Neglect never the fourfold adorations of the sun in his 4 stations, for thereby thou dost affirm thy place in nature and her harmonies." And again, in one of his primary texts, "Now there is one really important matter. The only thing besides the book of the law, which is in the forefront of the battle. As I told you yesterday, the first essential is the dedication of all that one is and all that one has to the great work, without reservation of any sort. This must be kept consistently in mind. The way to do this is to practice Liber Resh vel Helios." So it really places a huge importance on that. The book of the law being our central text, and we are encouraged to study it ongoingly. There is no end to the amount that one could delve into the book of the law. And it really, for Crowley, once he received it, became a central cornerstone that the entire Thelemic system sort of burgeoned out from. This was key to his philosophy. To say also then that the second most important thing that we could be incorporating into our study of Thelema is Liber Resh. Places it in reasonable importance, at least as far as Uncle Al thought. And why, Uncle Al? Why is this so very important that we should try to incorporate this practice into our lives? Well, he says this: "The object of this practice is firstly to remind the aspirant at regular intervals of the great work." That's the first thing. Secondly, to bring him into conscious personal relation with the center of our system. And thirdly, for advanced students to make actual magical contact with the spiritual energy of the sun, and thus to draw actual force from him. So sort of a threefold approach to why it is this might be beneficial for us. It's going to remind us about the great work regularly. The great work being what it is that we should be doing in our lives. Doing our will, focusing on our higher purpose here, our higher paths, working towards our personal development. A lot of times it's easy to just kind of get lost in your day. Days are busy. And even though you might be trying to incorporate a particular spiritual energy into your life, it's easy to not have that there when it's the middle of the day and you got 20 other things to do. But having just a very small thing that you can stop if you so desire and just focus this very simple act to bring yourself back to, am I doing the great work? Am I doing my will? Consistently. Every 6 hours even. Saying, is this what I should be doing for my great work? Secondly, to bring you into conscious personal relation with the center of our system. The center of our system is the sun, as we've said. And we're going to start to relate to the sun. We're going to relate to the passage of the sun, the circling of the sun. The sun represents the passing of time. It represents the cycles of nature, the entire circle of life and death, and the center of the universe, and perhaps also in our systems, the center of ourselves. So becoming more familiar with that and beginning to work with that kind of solar energy is very important. The third, to actually draw energy from this practice. So not just to invoke the solar energy, not just to adore or commune with the solar energy, but actually to be able to invite that into us, to be able to relate to that personally, and have that energize ourselves, our own practices, and have that be something that is a continual emboldening force for ourselves as we go throughout our lives. That's what Crowley thought. might be useful. He talked about it a lot. Oh, and one more. Particularly useful against the fear of death is the punctual and vigorous performance of Liber Resh. Meditate on the sun in each station, his continuous and even way, the endless cycle. So very much what we were just saying. This is the entire cycle of everything that is and was and will be, including ourselves. Everything that grows and dies is represented by this continual cycle across the sky. And that's the energy that we're going to touch on. A little bit of Kabbalah for you. We're not going to delve too deep into the Kabbalah of that because we could talk about that all night. But just to give you a little bit of a basic idea, this is the tree of life over here on the left. And when we are doing this ritual, if we were to imagine that we were going to place ourselves somewhere along this tree, if the tree were laid out before you on the ground, we would be standing at the intersection of Thelemic and Pei. You can see each of these paths is lettered with a particular Hebrew letter. That intersection is here at the center of Tiferet and Yesod. And I'm sorry, I just want to make sure that it's clear. This on the side is sort of an expansion of that, of the bottom little quadrant of the tree of life there. Tiferet being at the top, being in front of us as we're working. Tiferet represents the sun. It is often correlated to solar deities, so that's where we're going to start our solar adoration with the rising of the sun in that direction. We're going to work our way around in a circle, essentially, from Tiferet to Netzach, Yesod, and Hod. And there are correlations to some of the verbiage in the ritual and also to some of the hand gestures that we will make as we're going throughout this ritual that tie into this specific Kabbalistic placement. And I encourage you to delve deeper into that, but we're just going to touch on that for right now. Maybe if we have time, we can do more questions later. So this is where we find ourselves, right here, in the very center, working our daily ritual. There are several different signs that we're going to make as we do these adorations in each direction. At dawn, we are going to make the sign of the cross, also known as the sign of Osiris slain. And essentially you have a position with the arms out straight at the sides in sort of a Tau position. At noon, we are going to make a sign of fire, which is made by making a triangle with the hands and touching them to the forehead. At sunset, a sign of air, as if we are holding a great weight upon our shoulders. Sometimes it feels like that. And at midnight, a sign of water, which is an inverted triangle here about the solar plexus. And after each invocation, at the end of each of the sections, at each different standing, we're going to make a sign of silence, or a sign of harpokratz, which is a whisper gesture. You don't have to make this. Bring the finger to the lips. And these are the gestures that we will be holding, or would be holding as we practice, going through the various different stations of Liber Resh. Here we begin the actual text of the book itself. These are the adorations to be performed by aspirants of the AA. Let him greet the sun at dawn, facing east, giving the sign of his grave, and let him say in a loud voice, Hail unto thee, who art Ra in thy rising, even unto thee, who art Ra in thy strength, who travellest over the heavens in thy bark at the uprising of the sun. Tahuti standeth in his splendor at the prow, and Ra Hor abideth at the helm. Hail unto thee from the abodes of night. So, let's look at what we've just done a little bit. We're acknowledging the dawn of the sun. The sun has been reborn, it's coming up after the long night. And at each of these stations of the sun, we're going to acknowledge the aspect of the sun as related to a particular Egyptian deity. So Ra is the first deity that we're going to associate with the rising of the sun with dawn. We're greeting Ra from the abodes of night, what has been prior to, and now the uprising of the sun We're greeting Ra in his strength as the sun is renewed again. Now, you probably know who Ra is, but who's this Ra guy? Ra is one of the primary Egyptian solar deities. Generally a hawk-headed. He was worshipped in Heliopolis and actually widely across ancient Egypt. And as we were saying earlier, as one of the primary solar deities, he corresponds to Tiferet and the sun in the direction that we're facing, which is essentially east. So if you were to do this at your house, find the closest direction to east, get a compass. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly east. My house is just a little skewed from having the directions be set on a cross at my home, and so I've just basically designated, okay, well that corner is this way and that corner is that way, and it's just slightly off, but it makes things simple. We see Ra with the solar disk on his head. Usually has this large red solar disk and the serpent or cobra uraeus crown around that. There's a couple other Ras. One of the other gods that was just mentioned, Tahuti. Who's Tahuti? Why is he standing in his splendor at the prow? Tahuti is also Thoth. Thoth is the ibis-headed Egyptian god. Thoth is the god of wisdom and magic. He created the written language, he created the hieroglyphs, and is generally attributed as the god of writing and art. And he is up essentially guiding and guarding the way on our ride with the sun here. There's a couple more. And who is this Ra-Hor that abideth at the helm? Ra-Hor is also known as Horus. Horus is another solar deity, falcon-headed god, very similar to Ra actually. And you'll find this a lot actually in Egyptian deities where these different gods had archetypes which lasted through dynasties, through very long periods of time, and so the archetypes would remain, but the characters and names would change just a little bit. So you'd have Bastet, the cat goddess, who in one dynasty is kind of a gentle, loving sort of a goddess. But then you might have that particular area get taken over by a more warring culture. She becomes Sekhmet, and now she's a more angry kitty goddess. So you see similar archetypes being repeated, and we see that also within the solar gods, of different generational elements and different aspects of these deities. Also interesting, Ra-Hor, or Horus is the Ra-Hor Kuit is the god that is pictured on the Stele Revealing, which is what the image over here on the right is of. That's a close-up of the stele itself. I'm going to zoom in on the Ra-Hor Kuit. Yes?
Is there a difference between Ra-Hor and Ra-Hor Kuit?
They are different names for different elements of the same god. And you'll see kind of slight variations in different spellings, Ra-Hor Ku, and so there would be different slight changes in the translations, but essentially similar archetypes.
Okay.
So here's the situation that we have. We have Thoth. Here we have essentially a solar barge, or a ship, or a bark. Another great picture of one up there with all kinds of different gods up there. But this would have been within the Egyptian mythology. If we look at the different legends that they had, we would see that they believed that the sun was brought across the sky on a ship, being guided by Thoth, having Ra being a major part of that. And so what we're doing essentially is identifying with the sun on this ship as it travels over the sky above us through these different phases of the sun, and identifying with and invoking the aspect of the sun in the particular quadrant that we're working with as we move through them. Here's another, kind of similar. Here we see actually Thoth in the full, more ibis form. He's also occasionally a monkey. Ra here, solar disk, and the barge traveling with the sun. There is a quote from the Papyrus of Ani, which is the Egyptian Book of the Dead, that reads, "I have seen Horus at the helm and Thoth acting at his command. Thoth stands at the prow of thy boat, smiting all thine enemies." So some of this, that's where this imagery, where this idea comes from, is from these ancient Egyptian texts. And here is just a cool picture of what one of these boats actually looks like. So here's a version that they've actually been able to reconstruct that's in a museum. So that's the general scenario of what we're doing. So now we're going to do it at each individual section. So we've done that at dawn. Now it's noon. And these are best done, if possible, at the actual time of dawn, whatever that is for wherever it is that you are at that time, and at noon, and at sundown. They don't necessarily need to be done, and we'll kind of talk about some of the practical application stuff towards the end of this. But ideally, one is doing this at the actual stations when the sun is at its highest, when the sun is first at dawn. So, back to the text of the book itself. Also at noon, let him greet the sun, facing south, giving the sign of his grade, and let him say in a loud voice, "Hail unto thee, who art Ahathor in thy triumphing, even unto thee, who art Ahathor in thy beauty, who travellest over the heavens in thy bark at the mid-course of the sun. Tahuti standeth in his splendor at the prow, and Rahor abideth at the helm. Hail unto thee from the abodes of morning." So we're moving from that morning time into that midday time. The sun is at its very highest, its solar energy at its very highest, directly above us, and we're invoking it as Ahathor. Ahathor, also known as Hathor. Hathor is one of the primary female deities within Egyptian culture. She's one of the older goddesses. She is sometimes seen with a cow head, and is known as the cow that gave birth to the universe. She's a sky goddess, associated with both the moon and the sun. Her name is translated as House of Horus, and she is correlated to Netzach, which we are facing at this point as we've turned in our Kabbalistic circle, which correlates to Venus or Aphrodite, which, if the Greek were looking at her, that is the goddess that she would, a goddess of love, goddess of light, goddess of the sky. So here we are, triumphing. The sun is at its zenith, and we're going to acknowledge this particular goddess here. At sunset, let him greet the sun facing west, giving the sign of his grade, and let him say in a loud voice, "Hail unto thee who art tomb in thy setting, even unto thee who art tomb in thy joy, who travellest over the heavens in thy bark at the downgoing of the sun. Tahuti standeth in his splendor at the prow, and Rahor abideth at the helm. Hail unto thee from the abodes of day." So again, moving from that daytime into our evening setting, we're going to do this at sunset, as close to the actual downgoing of the sun as we are capable of doing. And we are going to acknowledge this position as Tum, also known as Atum. Tum, also one of the older Egyptian gods. He is a solar god that actually predates or would have preceded Ra, and is known as the original lord of the city of Heliopolis. His name can be understood as to make an end, or the old god grows weary, or to be complete. So he's got this sort of having reigned and am ready to relax now kind of a connotation to this archetype of this god, which makes perfect sense, tying it into the setting of the sun. This is our deity who has been in the sky, working throughout the day, bringing this across, and now it is time to rest. And that's what we have here with Tomb as our sun goes down, or Autumn. Generally pictured as a guy, doesn't really have an animal head variant. We'll see him usually with a dual crown, sometimes without a hat, but usually just sort of a, yes sir?
It makes me think of we're now heading into the time of autumn, and
Good point.
the sun was at its zenith, well, as far as we know, with the summer. So now it's time for rest.
Good point. Absolutely. That is perfect. And in fact, yeah, that's we're these each are going to correlate to a time of day, also to a time of season. If we were to extrapolate this over the course of the year, and if we were in the third quarter of the year, it would be autumn, and not, yeah, exactly. So interesting.
Yeah.
Absolutely true.
He has the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt.
Yes, I believe that. Yeah, the dual crown. Exactly.
That's what that is.
Exactly.
Not just any hat.
Nice. Very important hat.
Yep.
And lastly, at midnight, let him greet the sun facing north, giving the sign of his grade, and let him say in a loud voice, Hail unto thee, who art Kepher in thy hiding, even unto thee, who art Kepher in thy silence, who travellest over the heavens in thy bark at the midnight hour of the sun. Tahuti standeth in his splendor at the prow, and Rahor abideth at the helm. Hail unto thee from the abodes of evening. So, to be done at midnight, or as close to as seems reasonable to you, we are invoking Kefra, also Kefri, a couple different spelling changes there. This is an Egyptian god that was associated with the scarab beetle, or with the dung beetle. Sometimes appears as a physical person with sort of a scarab head. Also, sometimes just as the scarab beetle itself, often with the sun in its mandibles. Like you remember from All the Sweet Journey art cover, you know what I'm talking about? Don't Stop Believing, that guy? Okay, you got me. Thank you. So this corresponds to one of the theories that they had, where essentially the dung beetle will take a ball of dung and he'll roll it underground, and they used to associate this with the travels of the sun. And in the old Aeon, in the Aeon of Osiris, where essentially we thought that God died, we thought the sun died every night. There was some kind of a great catastrophe where the sun was going to die. We weren't sure if it was going to come back up. Nighttime was kind of scary. And that's how it's sort of a central theory behind a lot of the religions of that time period, or philosophies of that time period. Moving into a new Aeon now, we look at this is the Aeon of Horus, which is a continuing god, that there isn't a death in the nighttime, but that the sun is still plenty alive, and it's just moving around the other side in a continual circular orbit, and we have nothing to fear from it going away. But this is our deity, which is representing that midnight hour where the sun is hidden from us, the god is silent, and this is the quiet time as we transition back towards dawn. There's a great little infographic that I found on a website, Solving Coagula. If you want to check out their website. I do have a list of references on the end of this, so if you want to check out a couple of websites that I borrowed some reference from, you're free to. But here's just basically a little diagram. We have the directions themselves. We're starting off east. We're moving around south, west, north. Moving from Ra, Thor, Tomb, Kefra. Moving through the different elements that are associated with the Sephra that are around us within that Kabbalistic circle, and kind of showing the signs at each station. So. Yes?
What are the smaller ones in the middle that are in between?
These little guys right here?
Yeah.
So there is, where it says that you can use an appropriate sign of your grade, okay? There is an option at the beginning for the first sign that the signs of LVX can be used at the first station, as opposed to the sign of Osiris Risen, which was the arms out. This is perfectly fine, although I don't generally see people do this. I'm sure there are some people who do, nothing wrong with it, but it wasn't the way that I was particularly taught, not the way that my teacher showed me, and so not the way that I generally do it. But the LVX signs, which are up there, and you can look up and research some more if you would like to study those, which is very interesting, can be used within that first quadrant. But it seems like most people that I've seen do it starts off like that. And if you've ever done, if you have the opportunity to do Resh with other people, I encourage it. A lot of times this is an individual solo practice. We're at our homes, we're at our jobs, we're by ourselves. That's fine. But if you happen to be in an environment where you have other Thelemites or just somebody who's maybe interested or wants to check it out, or especially if you're in a group of a lot of other Thelemites, which is really cool, having the people around you to intone this and invoke this along with you is very powerful and very cool. Just like anything that you do with group work. So, I encourage that if you have the opportunity. Interesting also, just to make a quick point, is that we see a lot of the same correlations in other rituals. If you're familiar at all with the lesser ritual of pentagram, we see a lot of these same correlations in the same directions. And that's basically what this is laying out, having the different archangels in the different directions, different elements in different directions. And we also see that it incorporates that dawn and spring concept, which is exactly what we're working with up in the east, noon and summer in the south, dusk and autumn in the west, night and winter in the north. So this is where this kind of starts to play very well with some other ritual. And Crowley also encouraged working with the lesser pentagram ritual. If you're not familiar with that, we can talk about that at another time. I know we've done classes on that as well. I think I did a class on that actually, but we can talk about that more. But these two rituals play nicely, work together, and could be very well incorporated into each other. Continuing with the text of Liber Resh, and after each of these invocations thou shalt give the sign of silence, and afterwards thou shalt perform the adoration that is taught thee by thy superior. And when thou dost compose thyself, compose thyself to holy meditation. Okay. So we talked about we're going to give the sign of silence. So after each one of those sections that we just invoked, those different gods, we're going to give the quiet sign. And what is this adoration taught by thy superior? It seems kind of vague. It's generally agreed that the adoration taught to thee by thy superior is taken from Liber Al, from the Book of the Law, from a specific section from chapter 3, verse 37 and 38. These sections are parts of the paraphrase that Crowley put together from the Stele of Revealing translations that he got initially in 1904, and they were reinterpreted in 1912. Are we generally familiar with the Stele of Revealing story, what that is, kind of deal, a little bit? Essentially, Crowley in 1904 was on extended wedding with his wife, had been traveling throughout the world as they were on their honeymoon. They stopped in Cairo and were in Cairo for some time. And while there, had a series of magical events, which led to essentially his wife Rose telling them that he was being contacted by Ra. They had a message for him, and at first he was somewhat skeptical of this. His wife was not a magician or Egyptologist, so had no reasonable reason to be telling him what to do when it came to magic and Egyptology, which he was fairly well versed on. And there came a point where he took her to the Bullock Museum, and basically without prompting, she went directly to the image of the god that she said was contacting him through her. And it happened to be on a particular stele, on a tablet that's generally a burial tablet, a funeral tablet. And this particular one that they found had this picture of Ra Kuit, and she said, "That's the one right there, that's the way I'm talking to you." And this particular exhibit had the number from the museum of 666. And this number, of course, was very relevant and important to Uncle Al. And so he said, "Hey, there's obviously an important correlation here." And so he, as quick as he possibly could, had a translation done by one of the curators at the Bullock, which gave him a basic idea of what the text of the stele said. And from that, he sort of versified it, sort of made a poetic license a little bit out of it to incorporate different sections of that into the Book of the Law, which he received shortly after this stele was discovered. And so these sections have been sort of incorporated into various different passages within the Book of the Law. And here is the passage itself. So, once we make the sign of silence, we will say, and generally, I see people will cross their hands over their chests, as such, right over left. Unity uttermost showed. I adore the might of thy breath, supreme and terrible God, who makest the gods and death to tremble before thee. I adore thee. Appear on the throne of Ra. Open the ways of the Ku, lighten the ways of the Ka. The ways of the Kabs run through to stir me or still me. Oh, let it fill me. The light is mine, its rays consume me. I have made a secret door into the house of Ra and tomb, of Kephra and of Ahathor. I am thy Theban, O Mentu, the prophet, Ankh Afnakansu. By Besnamout my breast I beat, by wise Tanek I weave my spell. Show thy star splendor, O Nuit. Bid me within thine house to dwell, O winged snake of light Hadit. Abide with me, Ra-Hor Kuit. So these are the sections that we have that is sort of the adoration that is to follow. And this is the same for each quadrant. So we will invoke the particular god or goddess that we are facing within that direction, and then repeat this in each direction. There's some different things in here that we can sort of start to pick apart. When we talk about appearing on the throne of Ra, we heard something similar to that within that Gnostic Mass quote that we had earlier. The throne of Ra is the sun, is the horizon, is where the sun is sitting, where it is born. And we get into some kind of the theories of the Ku and Ka that we see as far as different ideas from the Book of the Law, dealing with the higher self, the spirit. So this is to be our adoration at each of the quadrants. Back to the text. Also, it is better if in these adorations thou assume the God form of whom thou adorest, as if thou didst unite with him in the adoration of that which is beyond him. So here we start to touch a little bit on the idea of assuming God forms. We're not going to go horribly into depth in this really, but here's just some ideas to kind of start off on approaching that. A good idea is to familiarize yourself as much as possible with the images of the gods that you are invoking. A lot of stuff online. It's not hard for us in this day and age to go find 100 pictures of Ra in every different way that he was ever portrayed, and lots of cool fan art and all other kind of stuff. So there's a lot of different versions of these that you can check out. Familiarize yourself with them. I've tried to give you some kind of the general basics of what they look like, but really get to a point where you know them pretty well, and then get to a point where you can start to envision them in your head. Like, I can imagine Kephra exactly. Like, I know what kind of thing he's wearing around his neck. I know that he's holding an ankh. I know that, everything about it. Get a really crisp image of this as much as you can. And then if you want, as you're standing in these different positions, invoking and adoring these different gods and goddesses, perhaps imagine that you yourself start to become this god. The way you envision this can be different, can be unique. I like to take a couple of breaths before I start, sort of ground myself, and imagine almost the image of the god or goddess sort of falling over the top of me, like a sheet or a shroud that is replacing my image with the image of the god that I am adoring at that time. And really trying to focus on then, what do all those details that I know look like from the position of being that? So not what does his neck jewelry look like from me looking at this picture here, but what does his neck jewelry look like from if I were him wearing that neck jewelry? and imagine that entire conception of that archetype from a personal perspective, I guess. And that's just a little bit of my personal thoughts. There's a lot to go in as far as assuming God forms and everything. I mean, very, very weighty, very meaty topic that we could go more into, but just familiarizing yourself with who the gods you're talking to, what do they look like, what would they look like, what could you look like, just to kind of start to work with that maybe a little bit. Thus, shalt thou ever be mindful of the great work which thou hast undertaken to perform, and thus shalt thou be strengthened to pursue it unto the attainment of the stone of the wise, the summum bonum, true wisdom and perfect happiness. The Thelemic current, as it were. This is the end of the text itself. So you can see it's not a super long book, and the ritual portions are not super complicated, and a lot of it repeats itself. So once you kind of get the general gist, once you know that adoration, well, now you know it every direction. Once you have the general format of the invocations of the different deities, you kind of get the gist of that, and it flows pretty easily. So now I kind of want to move into just a little bit of discussion about some practical applications, personal experiences, and then we can do some questions if we want. Does anybody have any personal experiences performing Liber Resh, either for a short period of time or for a long period of time or just in general, that they want to share? Just any kind of insight, like, yeah, I did that, it was cool, whatever, didn't do it, whatever. I don't know, any thoughts you might have. Yes?
I picked it up after I was doing the LBRP 3 times a day for a while.
Nice.
A couple months.
Nice.
And I decided, I would try Liber Resh because it's just one more to add.
Right.
There's 4 of them. So I started it, and I found that even though I wasn't doing it at the exact time of those times a day, like at dawn, especially at dawn because I'm not getting it better.
Who's up at dawn?
Right. But I found my body would naturally get into the cycle of it after a couple of weeks of doing it. I would wake up at as close to dawn as I would get. Usually it'd be like 8 or 9, but I found myself getting up at like 6:30, 7 o'clock.
Nice.
So, which was interesting, but there were certain ones that I had difficulty meeting.
Interesting.
Like the midnight one, I
Mm-hmm.
would forget because I'd be tired to go to bed. Forget
Right.
to do it before I went to bed and
Sure.
things like that. So, but I never got one full day of all 4, and so that's why I'm thinking about picking it up again. But
Nice.
I just found certain times of day were easier to do than others, and certain deities were easier to take on the dawn form than others. For example, like Hathor, I had already been familiar with working in that
Sure.
current. So it was easy for me to do that, and also noon is very easy. Most people are at lunch, that kind of thing. But other ones, like at sunset, throughout the tomb, because it's not one I'm not familiar with. And,
Right.
So it was a little bit harder to connect and to remember.
That makes perfect sense. That's awesome. That's good
Yeah.
experience. That's nice.
I gave it up because I got frustrated.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Would we like to do these on the hour, every single time, 4 times a day, all the time, every day? Sure. I think that would be wonderfully beneficial. I mean, and if that's what you do, I think that's awesome. However, we can be realistic and say that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you're not up at dawn. Sometimes you're not up till midnight. I'm like neither of those usually. And so, again, are those times ideal? Yes, we'd like to be on those times. However, I think that as far as the time issue, do it when you can. And to start off, make it easy for yourself and time it to your own schedule. You already have a cycle of the sun, and your cycle of the sun starts when you get up in the morning. If you're still sleeping, you haven't started that whole cyclical process of waking up your brain and getting yourself moving into the next day. Your personal cycle, you're still asleep. So start it when you get up. If you're not up till midnight, do it when you go to bed. Whenever that is. If you stay up till 11 o'clock, just, brush your teeth, do it before you go to bed. If you're in a meeting at noon, or you're in traffic, don't worry about it. Do it when you have a chance. Or do it when you remember. Sometimes I'm in the middle of work during the day, and I don't even realize that noon has passed. I'll look at the clock and it's 1 o'clock, and I'm like, oh man, when did that happen? Okay, well, I just realized it was the mid-course of day at 1 o'clock. Not perfect, but that's when I'm going to do that resh. When it is that I realize is as close as possible to my capability of doing that. And try not to stress on it too much, because this isn't supposed to be creating something in your life that you're supposed to feel bad about not doing. Your daily ritual should not be that. It should not be something that you feel obligated to in a negative way. Like, oh, I got to go to the gym and I feel bad every day that I don't. Or, oh, I feel like I should have done all those reshes and I didn't and I'm such a bad Thelemic. Don't worry about it quite that much. Set a goal for yourself. See that there may be some benefit in that practice and do it as well as you can. If you miss a time, don't worry about it. Jump on the next one. You know, you missed kefir that midnight. It was late. You were tired. Wake up the next morning, do raw. And get back into acknowledging that cycle. And interestingly, you may find that there are absolutely certain ones that you just always miss. Maybe that has something to do with your personal life. Maybe it has something to do with that particular aspect. Maybe you delve a little bit deeper into that and you say, well, I'm always missing tomb. Why is that? What are the associations Kabbalistically with the different elements or planets and the correspondences that those are related to? And how could there be something in my life that maybe is not unbalanced within that element? So, considerations. But don't stress on it too much. Do it when you have time. Do it when it works for you. It's really more of a practice than a ritual. It's like meditation. Yeah.
Is it recommended to do it out in the direct sun?
Great question. I like to, but again, is that always convenient? I think if you have the opportunity to, like you're home, you've got a backyard, it's just as easy for you to walk out into the sun and do this, go for it. Absolutely. Acknowledge that sun, be under that sun, feel the sun's warmth. If you're like a computer guy like me, you don't get enough sun, you're vitamin D deficient and everything. So it's good to get a little bit of sunlight on your skin, 15 minutes a day. There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely. If you have the ability, great. But if you don't have the ability, don't necessarily let that stop you. You can do this also in your head. You can use this as an opportunity to work on your own visualization abilities. So maybe you are at work and you're not comfortable for whatever reason, standing up at your desk and and doing this at noon. Okay, maybe people are going to think that's weird. That's fine. You don't have to. If they're whatever, you can totally do that too, and I encourage you to. But if you're not in a convenient position to do that, maybe you can just imagine that. Close your eyes, and just like we were imagining the assumption of these God forms, imagine yourself standing in that position, using that sign, facing that direction, assuming that God form. Hold that image in your mind as much as you can and do it within the astral body. You can do that. You don't even necessarily have to do the entire gesture. I've done this in the car sometimes. Maybe you're driving home, sun's going down. I'll do a sundown resh in my car on the freeway. And I'm not like this, I'm not doing cornholio as I go down the road. Right? Maybe you could. You got the knee driving, maybe that's good. That's fine. So, to your greatest capabilities. And don't stress on it too much. This is, in addition to the whole sun thing, and the solar energy and the capturing thereof, and the deities and all that, all these details, all the trappings of this ritual, they're all important. They are, and they're all specific correspondences and relations to all this imagery that are important. However, this is also just about taking a couple of moments throughout the course of your day to set aside the mundane and bring something spiritual into your life. Just remind yourself of what it is that you're trying to do personally. This isn't about worshiping Uncle Al. This isn't about worshiping these deities. You're not saying like, oh, Tomb is my new god and I will worship, no. You're acknowledging your own position within this cycle, and you're just stepping away from work or whatever it is in your daily activities to say, here's a moment where I can remember the great work. Is this where I'm supposed to be? Is this my will? Is there something that I need to balance here? Is there something I should be addressing? It's just a moment to just be aware. And it seems like a lot of times we don't have time for that. A lot of times we get too caught up. I always identify as a Thelemite, but if I'm not doing anything, if I'm not practicing anything, sometimes that starts to not be as present in my life. If I'm not going to Mass, if I'm not reading something, if I'm not reading the book of the law, and if I'm not incorporating a practice, meditation, pentagram ritual, whatever it is, Resh, then it stops being as present, as focused as now. And I feel like that going through periods of my own life, the Resh has been very beneficial. That just connecting to these natural cycles, connecting to that solar energy. In truth, I've honestly felt always a kind of a connection to the solar energy. And honestly, interesting from my own personal experience, there were time periods in my life where I felt very affected by the seasonal depression that we see a lot within the winter. A lot of people get bummed out in the winter. One of the possible reasons for this is considerable less sunlight. I know that this affected me a lot, and that I would have this very seasonal bum out that came every winter, and I hated Christmas, and it was a very hard time for me past that fall equinox. Like, it kind of went downhill from there for me in the past, till the solstice. And honestly, towards that beginning of the year, well, the end of the year really, I'd start to feel a little bit better. I feel like since incorporating more of this sort of solar energy and these types of practices into my life, that is less intense. That there is sort of a solar connection that I feel more consistently, that is less affected by how many hours of actual light there is outside the day. Now, I'm not saying doing Resh is going to cure depression or anything like that. I mean, that's, your mileage may vary. However, from my personal experience, working with this type of solar energy and having it be incorporated into your practice daily with your pentagram ritual or just with your meditation. Maybe you do this and then you just meditate and see what that does for you. Try it out. Record your experience. Keep a little journal. Write down, hey, these are the ones I did on this day. These are the ones I missed. And see what that looks like. And try it out. As we say, success is your proof. If you do it and you like it and it works well for you, awesome, keep doing it. And if it doesn't, you don't have to. Or you can try out something else, or you can tweak it a little bit. It's totally up to you. So, that is Liber Resh vel Helios. And do we have any other questions or anything? Yes.
I have a few questions.
Cool.
But I'll start with, alright, so there's, I understand these gods are very particular, especially to Thelemic and such, but there are so many other gods that could symbolize the same thing, and
Sure.
do you find a certain power, do you think it's significant enough to, you should use those, or do you think it would be just as powerful to whatever god you're identifying with that element or that power to incorporate in instead or something?
Sure, you're saying if you felt a particular connection to a different deity and you'd like to incorporate that deity in, is that going to be okay? Initially I say, sure, absolutely. I'm a big fan of personalizing your practice and finding out what it is that works best for you. If you came to me and said, I just tried this out, and instead of O.T.O, I imagined all Greek gods and goddesses because I really liked the Greek pantheon, and I had imagined it was Aphrodite, and it just clicked for me, I wouldn't say, you're wrong! That's not the right way to do it, not at all. No, that sounds like that worked great. Now, there are a lot of specific correspondences and relations between these particular gods and the Kabbalistic sort of environment that we find them in. So there are specific reasons to use these gods. Like, Crowley didn't just pick some random gods out of a hat and say, yeah, these ones are good, okay, fine. So, yes, I encourage the usage of these gods, but I wouldn't dissuade you from exploring your own either. Try it out. What do you think? You got more?
I have more.
What do you got?
Okay. Alright.
Oh, what happened to my thing?
No. What's the pretty picture? So, what about, I mean, I feel like this has kind of already been answered because you were talking about, oh, sometimes you can't do the sign at work because your coworkers will be like, what the fuck is
Sure.
this guy doing?
Yeah, right.
But also, like, the rules, the instructions say in a loud voice.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, I mean, I can totally see there being, like, a power in actually invoking the spoken word, but what do you think about inner invoking, you know? Do you see?
Again, I think that both could be completely relevant.
Yeah.
The loud voice, you know, having a strong projection in ritual can be really empowering. Can be very energizing. So I think that's useful. However,
Do you have more slides?
I don't. We can just leave it.
Okay, good.
Yeah, no, if that's
I
actually...
forgot to plug in the power cord.
Oh, is it good? All right, we're good. We're good on slides. Slides are over. But again, I would encourage you, hey, if you're in a position where, like for example, if I'm doing kefir and it's midnight and my wife has already gone to bed, I'm probably a little less loud voiced than I would be otherwise. All right. So, I mean, yeah, if your situation requires, you could whisper it to yourself. You could say it internally. Again, you could sit at your desk at work, put your head down, close your eyes, and do this entirely within the astral body if you were so inclined. However, I do feel it is beneficial to do it physically, to take on these forms, to stand in such a manner, and put the physical energy into it if you have the means. Certainly. Keep going. Anybody else going to jump in? What do you got?
I've got one more.
Okay.
So, alright. The ritual uses basically the same words over and over again. Just insert the right.
Insert new God here.
God here.
Changes a couple of words.
Yes.
Mhm.
And, okay. And again, the words are super specific to that theology.
Mhm.
And I was just wondering on your opinion of the significance and the, why? Why do you keep saying, like, oh, this, like, I don't know, you know?
As far as why the repeating parts or why the parts that are not repeating?
Why the repeating parts and, you know, since it's so specific to those gods, it's, to me, I see it as restrictive, and I'm wondering on, like, what's your opinion on how it empowers this ritual?
Sure. Well, look at any ritual that you're doing, and you have to appreciate the structure or the restrictions that you have set out for yourself. I like the very free-form approach to ritual, completely. And I have done rituals where I have started off with a general concept of a goal or as something I'd like to achieve with the purpose of this ritual, and then just done stuff. Had things at my disposal that I could work with, elements, tools, and on a completely intuitive basis, just did what came to me. And that was the ritual, okay? Which can be useful. However, limiting ourselves and giving ourselves a structure, having some kind of basic restriction a little bit on, okay, this is a context, this is a structure, this is a little machine that we're building that has a particular purpose, and it's got bits and pieces inside of it. And the bits and pieces are there for a particular reason, and if they're not, it doesn't maybe quite do what we initially intended it to do. It might do something different, which might be fine. But there is good reason to adhere to the strictnesses of the ritual that you're working with. Look at the Gnostic Mass. There are a lot of people that practice the Gnostic Mass, and a lot of people do little things differently. Little slight nuancy differences. However, there is a set codex that says this is how this ritual is done correctly. And you can say something a little different as far as how you're going to, intone it or versify it, but you really can't change the words. And you really can't change the gestures because these really are there for a particular reason. And I buck against that a little bit. I get that. You're like, but what if I want to do it my own way? What if I want to incorporate my own, position into this, my own habit? And I think that's wonderful. So there's room for both. There's room for personal exploration and private work and trying different gods and trying different, types of invocation or whatever it is that it works for you. However, also try the way it is and maybe compare the two. Yes, sir.
Just to kind of add on to that, I think one of the things Crowley was into is having like a kind of a unified aesthetic to whatever ritual he was doing. I think it was one of his his criticisms of the Golden Dawn is it seemed very hodgepodge, kind of like
Sure.
platypus-like sticking all these random things together into one ritual.
Right.
And so if you're doing the Egyptian gods, you'll have something very like Egyptian papyrus, like "Hail unto thee, who art this and that." If you have like Aphrodite, you might go toward the more like Greek poetry, syntax and style, that kind of thing. So I think internally it makes sense to have it consistent as well. Aside from the general considerations of what you're saying, of like having particular restrictions being worthwhile. Just another thought to that.
Definitely. No, I totally agree. Right on.
Sweet.
What's up?
And to tailcode on that, it's not specifically a question for you, but just kind of an open question.
Yeah.
I was thinking about on the figure that they showed, he was associating the elements and the seasons with those deities, and I was curious if that's something that we should be embodying when we're focused on those energies as well.
I think so. You know, the more that you can incorporate into your imagination as you're working these rituals, and as far as the imagery and the different elements that you can keep track of, I think that's beneficial, yes. As far as working on invocation and making these deities seem as realistic and real as you can possibly do to yourself. Trying to think of an example. I think ultimately incorporating as many of the different elements of that circle, like you were saying, the different elements, the different tools, the different archangels, the different colors, the different seasons, the different times of day, incorporating all of those as much as you can into what you're doing and being aware of them during your ritual is beneficial. Because you can start to do things like, if you're doing a lesser banishing ritual, if you're doing a pentagram ritual, and you're invoking the archangels around you, being able to envision those archangels is useful. Okay, I know that Raphael is in front of me, and he's wearing a yellow robe, and he's holding a sword, and he represents spring. So I can incorporate smells, visual elements, as many sensory elements as possible to make that experience as rich as you can internally for yourself, and to internalize all these correspondences as much as possible so they just seem natural to you. And I think that's useful. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
The ritual itself helps internalize those things.
Yes, and doing this ritual, I tell you what, if you wake up in the morning and do a lesser pentagram ritual and then a resh, every day you will know those really good, right? You do them for a few times a day, 3 times a day,
Yeah.
you internalize the heck out of that. And the more you do that, the easier it is for you to envision these things, and the more it comes, the ideas, the imagery comes naturally, and so then you can start to focus on the energetic exchange. What is this doing to me on a more sensitive level, perhaps? Awesome.
On the flexibility part,
Sure.
I did kind of change things around a little bit.
Yeah.
Because now I'm thinking about that. I'm like, 'cause that's how usually when I started doing this stuff, I'd always been freeform everything.
Sure.
And then I'm like, well, fuck, if I'm going to do this, I got to do this the correct way first, and then I can do whatever. But I did that with LBRP, and it was fine.
Mm-hmm.
But then I tried to do it with Resh, and I think that's where I fucked up. And it wasn't so much because Hathor and Tomb, I did those one every day at the same time. It was the other two, and it was because I had switched them. I did Kefra in the morning because Kefra is the beetle, and it comes out during the day from the sun, and
True.
it burrows itself.
Burrows
That's
out
why
at
they say
dawn.
Kefra and that hiding.
Sure.
And whereas Ra is actually hiding.
Right.
So I switched them because it just made more sense to me, like logic.
Sure.
But that's not the point of it. So that's why I'm going to try it again in the classical sense of it, and in the way that Crowley has it. So
Yeah.
I'll try it that way. And see.
And I don't want you to think that you fucked it up or that you
No, but
did
it did
it
because
wrong.
I didn't do it according to his formula,
Well-
which is really how I should try it because that's just what works for me.
Sure.
But I now that I'm thinking about it in retrospect after what she was just saying, I was like, yeah, that's right, I did do that. So.
And I totally I relate to that. I get that, and I think that it took me a long time to come to Thelema and come to ritual magic and be able to accept someone else's ritual, someone else's imagery, because I'm an artist. I like to come up with my own imagery, and I like to, do practice my own way. But there is something beneficial to be said for doing it the way it is. So.
I mean, even the order of the gods in Liber Resh isn't exactly logical. It should be Horus at the dawn. According to Egyptian mythology, it should be Ra at noon.
Exactly, yeah.
So
You could play around with and find some different.
I assume there's a good reason
Yeah.
for putting them where they are.
Right.
You had a question?
Well, I was just going to say, from what I understood from reading Crowley after a while, the reason that he does things specifically was that, I guess he was explaining in ritual magic, if it works, it works, and if you take it and twist it any other way, it might not work, but it's kind of like, I don't know, in like chemistry or something, that if you mix things incorrectly, you're going to end up with a poor result. So if you don't follow a mathematical structure, I don't know, he could have been onto something saying that it really worked, whatever he was trying to accomplish, only specifically under those conditions.
I think that's totally accurate, and people who are drawn to the flame are totally those chemists that are like, what happens if I do this?
Right. Like, if you like to explore your own ritual, you are in the right place. There's nothing wrong with that. Crowley liked to do that too. And encouraged us to be our own scientists, to be exploratory, to be cynical, and even of him, and maybe especially of him, and to find our own way and to figure out what works for us. That's part of this practice. This is not a practice where somebody stands on a pulpit and says, "Do this every day exactly this way, or awful things will happen to you." That's not the context of what's happening here. This is hey, here's a useful tool. Some people have used this to be beneficial for them, and here's the way that they used it. Maybe you want to try it out using it that way too. Maybe you want to try out using it your own way after you've done that for a while, and you find a great way that works for you too. Ultimately, the exploration and the personal growth is the purpose of the process here. Awesome. Anything else? You guys are awesome. You're awesome. Cool. Well, thank you all very much. Appreciate you taking time to come out and chat with me some this evening. And let's do it again. Try it out. See what you think. Take some notes. It's fun stuff. It's good practice. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love
Thank you. Did I get an Arsenio at the end there? Nice.